let's just go back to where we were. Let me say that I'm not going to go back to death, which has its own complicated stuff in it, which we did a lot with last time. We've got to go on to the part on anticipatory resoluteness. So the first thing, general thing I want to say is that it's part of the way formal indication works, that it's not too clear when you've done it completely and gotten rid of all the everyday and traditional ways of thinking about guilt and death in this case, but other problems, other things in other cases, but let's not talk about the others. Anyway, you've never sure when you've got it thought sort of formally indicated, cleared through. And I think that's the problem with death. Guilt, I think he does it. So I want to go back and start by just saying some general things about that. But because if you see what happens with guilt and conscience, how totally they are formally indicated away until their essence has sort of, as I say, either nothing or a 180-degree opposition to their way we normally understand them. Well, look what happens with guilt. I mean, it turns out it's being the basis of a null projection. It's being ungrounded. It's not being able to get behind your throwiness. It's sort of the opposite of responsibility, of autonomy, of choice. Well, never mind choice. Choice is still in there. But the very fundamental notions about conscience and guilt all turn out to be part of the cover-up. So the final story, the ontological story, when we finally get to the essence of guilt, it doesn't look anything like what we thought guilt was. Let's look at 328. There's where he says he's going to formalize it. When he's talking about this thing, which I'm calling formal indication, what he means this business, and we talked about it, you designate something and then you formalize it is you go and you investigate it more and you see that the traits that it seems to have when you started are cover-ups of something more basic. And this is what he's doing on 328. I'm just going to go back there for a minute. On 328, in the bottom paragraph, he's telling us how and I didn't read this, but it's exactly what I said last time and what I just said now. The way you drop out all the characteristics that describe what you're dealing with when you finally formalize it. So let's look at the bottom of 328. Skipping in a little. The idea of guilty must be sufficiently formalized so that those ordinary phenomena of guilt which are related to our concern for being with others will drop out. So all the ordinary phenomena of guilt are dropping out. Owing anybody anything, feeling guilty toward anybody, lacking something that you should have done for somebody, all that's gone. The idea of guilt must not only be raised above the domain of that concern in which we reckon things up, but also detached from relationship to any law or ought. So conscience has nothing to do with what you ought to be doing, and guilt has nothing to do with failing to do what you ought to be doing. They're just not normative notions when he gets done with them. So it's not a question of ought that failing to comply with it loads you with guilt. For here too, guilt is still necessarily defined as a lack, when something which ought to be and can be missing. And that's just not what it is. And then he describes what it is at little above the middle of 329. We define the formally existential idea of guilt as being the basis for a being which has been defined by a not, that is to say, being the basis of a nullity. And then he describes more later what kind of nullity it is, this kind of nullity that can't get behind its throwiness. Now that's just kind of review. I only say it because I don't think death is pushed all the way. I think that some of the characteristics of death are the essential ones, and some of them seem to be characteristics of the terminal event that is at the end of your life, not perishing, not the end of your life as a living thing, but the end of Dasein, as we said in the very end of the last lecture in a hurry. And what it looks like sometimes there's an unget-aroundable end in which sooner or later you find that you have no more possibilities. And that I think is, and that seems to contradict some other aspect of death as he defines it, in which you put the emphasis on possibility, that it's the possibility of having no more possibilities. It's not in any way the actuality. So it's the possibility of world collapse, to put it in another way. It's not the event of world collapse. It's not something that happens inevitably at the end of Dasein's existence when it ceases to be. All of that seems to me is not formalized enough. What's formalized enough is that there is some unrelatable and in some way certain characteristic of Dasein's way of being, and that gets covered up with anything that has to do with what could happen to you when the world actually collapses, and what is inevitable and what is terminal. That's covering up some constant way that Dasein is, and that constant way that Dasein is vulnerable to world collapse, and that's what's being covered up by by whatever is left in his definition of death, which points to there being at the end of Dasein's life this inevitable event after which it has no more possibilities, the absolute impossibility of any possibilities. That's the wrong end, the wrong way to think about death, I think. So anyway, I just come back to it because I sort of brood about it, that I can't anyway get all the characteristics of death together, because some of them seem to be more formalized than others. And I think, and I'll just say it again, it's just a kind of intuition that just as guilt is utterly separate from, that ontological guilt is utterly separate from something you can incur or take on yourself or pay off, or that has anything to do with others, has anything to do with normativity. Guilt is just something else. It's thrownness, and that's just different. And I think death should be something else, just as different. And that something else just as different is that Dasein isn't a necessary kind of being. It's always possible that Dasein will stop being. That's just another way to put it. And when it does, it needn't be a kind of stopping of being, which is the final one, a terminal one, an inevitable one, and a certain one. All that sounds too much like croaking, or if not croaking, then some other thing that happens to Dasein at the end of its life. So, okay, now I'm just repeating myself, so let me go on. So I'm going to catch up where I was going. Death is not perishing, it's a way of life, and it seems sometimes to be a terminal Dasein kind of demise event, and the end of all possibilities, and sometimes it seems to be further formalized and be the possibility of the end of all possibilities. And that's how I want to understand it. So let me see I'm still trying to review and sum up here. So we get to the question, and how does one act when one makes death a way of life? And to do that, we have to take a big detour now through what guilt and resoluteness, and how that combines with anticipation to get you anticipatory resoluteness, and what kind of life you lead when you are anticipatory resolute. And now I think how much I haven't figured, I'm so confused that I haven't even been able to figure out the following. How much of this, my confusion, is in the text, and how much of this confusion, if it is there, is caused by the fact that he begins with anticipatory, as you know, and defines it, and starts the whole division 2 with a big discussion of death, and then he does guilt and resoluteness and conscience, and then he comes back to death by bringing in anticipatory, which he's already done. But let's do it now in his order and see if we can make sense of it the way he's doing it. So we're going to start on 306. I begin with 306 because that's where he brings in anticipation too soon. He's talking about death. He hasn't said anything about anticipation, and all of a sudden on 306 he introduces it. I believe this is the first introduction of it, and I think he's introducing it here as a technical term in italics in the second paragraph. That being towards this possibility as being towards death is so to comport ourselves towards death that in this being and for it, death reveals itself as a possibility. Our term, and where possibility doesn't mean some present at hand possibility, there's some possible event that's going to happen in the future sometime, inevitably. He's clear that he doesn't want it to mean that. It's a possibility the way possibility operates with Dasein, namely it's a way that your whole life gets structured. It's the sort of shape of your projects. The stuff that I think Bill Blattner is very good on, where what is it to have as your for the sake of which is something that organizes all your activities. So here, anticipation as a possibility for Dasein organizes something, gives some kind of way of acting to Dasein, which he isn't ready to talk about yet until way later, but he introduces it here. And okay, so he wants to introduce anticipation of a possibility of behave, but in this way of behaving, does there not lurk a coming close to the possibility? And when one is close to a possibility, does not one its actualization emerge? Of course, that would be not the way it works with Dasein. Present at hand possibilities, I think you realize, but I'll just repeat it. Present at hand possibilities remain possibilities until they get actualized, and then generally they're better than possibilities. Kant's famous for saying that real dollars are better than possible dollars, but the existential possibilities are higher than present at hand possibilities. They don't ever get actualized. It isn't as if they're possible for a while and then one day they become actual. They just stay possible as what organizes your life. This is such an interesting idea, and I believe what Blattner says about it. So if your ultimate possibility as Dasein is to be a professor, to say, that doesn't mean that one day you'll get actualized as a professor and then you'll be even better than being a possible professor. That means that being a professor organizes everything you do in such a way that it couldn't be something you would arrive at and actualize, like getting tenure. It's constantly if it weren't for already using the word actual, you could say it was constantly actual, but that's wrong, because that's present at hand talk. It just constantly organizes whatever you're doing, if it's your for the sake of which. And death is doing that too. As a possibility, it's constantly organizing what you're doing. I'll read it the very italics, and then you can talk, Deland. The closeness with which one may have in being towards death as a possibility is as far as possible from anything actual. And the more unveiledly this possibility gets understood, the more purely does the understanding penetrate into it as the possibility of the impossibility of any existence at all. And that possibility is not some event that could ever occur. That's that is well, again, that's going to organize everything you do. It is that your world, your Dasein, can stop being at any moment. But it's not the moment when it stops being that's important. What's important is the experience that it's possible that it could collapse. Okay, Dylan. Okay, good.
One with a kind of a cognitive or more conceptual.
No. There is another distinction which you're interested in, but I think, between expectation, which is the representation of something that's going to happen and hasn't happened yet. But then there's something that's not an expectation, but an anticipation, when you're coping with things, and like Merleau-Ponty. And it's not like that either, because both expectations and anticipations have a condition of satisfaction in which they finally happen. They arrive. Well, yeah, or at least your Merleau-Ponty's anticipation of a doorknob as you get up to leave the room and your hand begins to take the shape of the doorknob, that's certainly not an expectation. You're not expecting the doorknob, but you're anticipating it, and if something happens and suddenly it gets taken away, you'll be startled. So anyway, it's neither an anticipation nor an expectation. This kind of anticipation this kind of possibility that he's talking about has no success condition. It never is actualized. And he's sort of constantly playing with the fact that even when your possibility of having no more possibilities is actualized, it's not really actualized because there's no you anymore, and you never take part in an event which actualizes the possibility of your having no more possibilities, because you're defined by your possibilities, and when that event of having no more possibilities occurs, you're not there anymore. And he's clear about that. That's another way of saying it has no actualization conditions. Anything else? I'm happy to hear people say things because it will help maybe understand what's going on. But I'm still sort of trying to get a running start to what we read today. I went way back to try to see if I could see how it's all fitted together, and I failed. But I'll go through the process that I went through. Okay, let's see. Where are we? So there he defines anticipation first, I think, on 306. And he talks more about it on 308. And where, I don't know, let's see. Here at the bottom. He's come back at the bottom, in that bottom paragraph. When by anticipation one becomes free for one's own death, one is liberated from one's lostness and the possibilities which thrust themselves upon one, and liberated in such a way that one can authentically understand and choose among the possibilities lying ahead of the possibility. Anticipation discloses to existence that its uttermost possibility lies in giving itself up, and shatters all tenaciousness to whatever existence one has reached. Now, I read that because that's the way anticipation comes back when he gets to anticipatory resoluteness. Then he says that what happens, just plain resoluteness, hasn't sort of given up all clinging tenaciously to possibilities, and that's what happens when you go from resoluteness to anticipatory resoluteness. So he's got it, he's putting it in here, but he's going to need it way back later. And that's all I can say about it. He doesn't need it here, and he tells a whole story here, which he's going to come back to later. Let's read a little more. But what he says here, briefly, he's going to say later when he does anticipatory resoluteness more thoroughly, namely that you can't, how does he put it back there? Well, we'll wait till we get there. But what he says here is, anyway, and what the general idea is, that you've got to be flexible. And when you're thrown into a way of acting which is resolute, you must always be ready to give up whatever particular projects you're acting on. And that's part of resoluteness, is that you're acting in a way that is ungrounded and not guaranteed, and it can collapse. So here's the first sort of thing that anticipation has to do with world collapse. Let me just read a little more. In anticipation, Dasein guards itself against falling back behind itself. It guards itself against becoming too old for victories, free for its own most possibilities, which are determined by the end and so are understood as finite. Dasein dispels the danger that it may, by its own finite understanding, fail to recognize that it is getting outstripped by the existence possibilities of others, or rather that it may explain these possibilities wrongly, and so forth and so forth. That is, I take it, that you've got to be ready always to take back whatever it is that you have committed yourself to and defined yourself in terms of, and that anticipation is the stance which is always open to taking anything that it's committed itself to back, but not just. This is the kind of thing that Hoagland is good on, not just sort of flighty ready flexibility, ready to take anything back, not sort of postmodern flexibility for its own sake, but simply that you never get fanatical, you never get stuck on anything, even though you stick with it. This is Hoagland's slogan: stick with it, but don't ever get stuck with it. That's what anticipation is supposed to give you, that he's talking about here. And he talks about it, in italics on the top of 311. So I'm reading all this, although it was part of last time's reading about death, because it's the anticipation part of it is what comes up again after he does the part on guilt. So we've got to go back and find it. So he says now at the top of 311, we've now summarized our characterization of authentic being towards death as we projected it existentially. Anticipation reveals to Dasein its lostness in the they self and brings it face to face with the possibility of being itself, unsupported by concerned felicitude, by being itself in an impassioned freedom towards death. Freedom towards death. I'm always wondering whether death is the freedom towards the world collapse, or whether the freedom towards death. Well, I don't. A freedom which has been released from the illusions of the day, practically certain of itself and anxious. We said last time that death was, what was our slogan? Death was it was acting on the possibility of no more Dasein, right? What was the phrase? I have it here from what you wrote down last time. Death was the possibility of demise. Freedom toward the possibility of demise. See, that's so weird. I would have thought freedom to act in terms of the possibility of demise, which was really freedom to act in the light of the possible impossibility, and freedom toward death is death. Death is I'm lost every time I get into this. And you say something, because I'm reading. Free being towards death. Free being towards death. Okay, free being towards death. And let me think about it. Yeah, but if you say that death is the possibility of demise, so freedom, okay, to act in the light of the possibility of demise. Is that right? Freely acting in the light of the possibility of demise. You don't look happy with that. I don't know. Okay, yeah, Tyler.
What's the matter with getting rid of the word death? If every time we talk about being towards death, we get caught up.
Well, yes, everything's lost, because if all you've got left is stuff that happens to people at the end of their lives, and the whole thing is supposed to be something you're doing right now. Okay, I see. You're going to keep dying as a way of life, and have death, not death. Well, let's try it and see what happens. Impassioned freedom towards death, but he's got death. Now, what are you supposed to do with it? Freedom, okay. Impassioned freedom towards the end. Is that demise, the end? Because I think we want whatever this impassioned freedom towards death, that ought to be what you're calling dying. Yeah.
We don't want to talk about death. Let's talk about the end.
Okay, now being towards the end with dying. Okay, wait, well, before you talk, Eugene, you want to answer?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. But in characterizing the possibility of death,
but why does it help to put in place of death perishing, which is an event of no more possibility? Okay, and dying is fine. Dying is living. Dying is a way of life. Dying is living in the light of, of the fact that Dasein has this possibility of having no more possibilities, and that's supposed to permeate everything you do. And one of the ways it permeates everything you do, just let me put it with, is the way it keeps you from getting stuck on anything, as if that was something that that was absolutely important to you. You will be able to give up anything that seems absolutely important to you, since you've sort of given up everything, given up the assurance of everything all the time as you act. Once you've understood that you're always acting in the light of the possibility that, I take it, Tyler, would you object? I don't know. I've always tempted to say, you act in such a way that the next moment may be your last. I take it you really aren't supposed to say that, but it looks like that's what it comes to. You stick with that. Okay, and it sounds better, too, than the thinking that the next moment may be your last, because that makes it brings it nearer, but it's still something that hasn't happened yet that might happen, and that's not what you want to deal with. You want to deal with something, the other thing, the possibility of no more possibilities, not the next moment may be the moment in which the possibility of having no more possibilities gets cashed out or something like that. That's not it. Okay, go ahead.
Death is no longer supposed to be an event, but I think the definition of guilt is liability and economy. So I think perhaps we should struggle with the definition of guilt of death. Regarding the phrase freedom towards death, I don't know if it's already been mentioned or offered. I thought that was...
Well, that's what we're trying. That's what everybody seems to be saying. Yeah, freedom towards death is, according to Tyler, and I think true misleading way of taking it, because you can't help but fall back into getting death as seeming to be like demise, and seeming to be the event of the ending of Dasein, which isn't quite an event, but that isn't important here. So we better just leave it, just say, instead of freedom towards death, dying, as acting with and committing yourself seriously, but always flexibly to whatever it is you're doing. That's what it is to have an impassioned freedom towards death, I take it. And of course, you'll be out of the one that gets committed to doing all sorts of things, or is flighty and never commits itself to anything. This is a way of being not flighty but steadfast, and yet have, in a certain way, already got over sort of any kind of fanatical attachment that if something or other doesn't happen, it'll just be a total disaster. I'm teaching Kierkegaard now, and in Kierkegaard, this is the movement of resignation that everybody's got to make, that everything is a gift, and you don't have any claim on anything, and you can't make your happiness depend on achieving something or other, and then you'll be able to really devote yourself to things and enjoy them and so forth. But you give up some idea that it's related to autonomy again, isn't it? Some idea that you can control your life and that you can commit yourself to something and remain committed to it no matter what. You've got to realize that finally you can't control your life, and that Well, what? That you are ready to give up any particular possibilities that you're projecting into. Somebody else had a hand up? Yeah? Yeah? Well, yeah, but it's comporting toward life under a certain description, namely, as always possible I mean, I don't know if I would put possible in there, as never guaranteed, of never necessary never necessary in the sense that you can count on it, never necessary in the sense that you couldn't get along without it, and so forth. So it's a certain way of dealing with all possibilities. But that's a way of life. Yeah, we keep coming back to that. You look like you're worried about that. Yeah, it does sometime. Give us some German. Good. Right. Impending means you never want to just, let's repeat this, think that that you're moving nearer and nearer to some moment, which is this moment of death. You are moving nearer and nearer to some moment, namely perishing. But that isn't important, for one thing, because you won't be there. Go ahead. Yes, it's important always to say that, and that would be for Deleuze too. Don't let the word anticipation fool you. It's just Vorläufen, which means just, as Eugene says, running ahead. And again, even that's sort of confusing, because it sounds like there's something in the future that you're running ahead to, but it isn't even that. Going forward. Yeah, going forward, I guess you can say that without... Yeah, as long as are going ahead, that's all right. The point is, don't think that you're getting nearer and nearer to something when you're running forward. As soon as you do that, then you get back, you have to keep telling yourself this. Death is not something impending in the sense of a future possibility which will someday get actualized. There is such a thing. Namely, you're perishing. But it's not what we're talking about. Is that, any more fours? Calls us forth. Okay. Good. And all of them are avoiding, and that's just the other way of saying what he said. All talk of somehow anticipating, getting nearer to it, and so forth. It's not an event in time that we're talking about. Okay, conscience comes along later and calls us to do it. That's good. Yes, that's a way. You're trying to explain, and I hope somebody would, why the chapters are in this order they are. Is that right? Yes, I think conscience could be put afterward. I don't really understand. I don't see how guilt, how not get behind your thrownness. There are two parts to what comes afterward. The guilt part I would have put in front. By your conscience part I would have put after. Yeah. Okay. I had a hand. Yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe appropriate to
try mortality. I think Heidegger would like that. Yeah, I like that. That's good. And then, what's really good is later Heidegger, he refers to us as the mortals, whatever he refers to people. And he says always something like, the mortals are the ones who can die. And I think any normal person reading it thinks, he means that, they're going to croak sometime. But he doesn't, of course. He means the mortals are the kind of people are the kind of beings who can live in the possibility of no more possibilities. Period. Yeah, mortal is good. He really buys that. Okay. Yeah. If it's foreboding, that's unfortunate, because that suggests impending. We don't want that. We don't want that, because are you suggesting that we should look at it? I see. Yeah. Well, no, I think that's right. We avoid anything like that. What did you say again? Foreboding. See, foreboding is what? That you think the sad event is going to occur, and you have a bad feeling about things. And at least, and that association we don't want. That's like, that's like feeling that a safe is going to drop on your head soon, and that's foreboding. And that's not it. Okay, ready, everybody? Well, that was helpful. So now we can go on. So we're going to live in the face of the constant possibility of world collapse. And that gets us to anxiety. All these things are in here. One of the things I was trying to see was you should keep your eyes open for it too. I found half of what I was looking for. I think there are I've said this before, three forms of nullity. There's the nullity of being the null basis, which is the guilt one. There is the nullity of the possibility of no more possibilities, and there's the nullity of choice, and he does name them all nullities. I wondered if he did. But what I'm surprised at is I can only find two anxieties. There's certainly the anxiety that death is anxiety at the bottom of 310. And that's because Dasein is face-to-face with the nothing, where I'm about 15 lines from the bottom of 310, of the possible impossibility of its existence. So anxiety is the experience of being face-to-face with the possible impossibility of your existence. And that doesn't mean that you're just about to be hung or something. That means that all the time you're always anxious and you're always in the face of the possible impossibility of your continued existence. And so there is an anxiety of death, and later he's going to tell you there's an anxiety of guilt, and I'm sure there's supposed to be a third anxiety of choice. It's just that he's so uninterested in it that he didn't bother to name it. And it's just important to it's helpful to keep those three in mind. They're all aspects of the fundamental, as he says here, the fundamental nothingness, really, that Dasein is, if you're looking for something of the strong sort that the philosophers will hope to have, some kind of grounding, there isn't any, that's the guilt, and some kind of assurance that you're immortal, there isn't any, and that's the anxiety of death. And the anxiety of choice is the funny one Sartre likes best and Heidegger finds sort of boring, is that if you choose something, you can't choose a whole lot of other things. You annihilate them. So every choice nullifies a whole bunch of other possibilities. Okay, now where am I? Back to this. So anxiety comes in here. And now we want to talk about how this is going to be attested, which is his word, when I say manifest, and how people live. What is it like you are existential, the existential, you are this kind of nullity which is thrown and towards death. And how do you live that? How do you attest to the fact that you are? Well, this is at the bottom of 311. If we succeed in uncovering the attestation phenomenologically, let me go back a little. The question of Dasein's authentic being a whole, remember he started with that, and of its existential constitution still hangs in midair. It can be put on a phenomenal basis, which will stand the test only if it can cling to a possible authenticity of its being, which is attested by Dasein itself. That is there a way that Dasein can manifest that it has or is this structure? If we succeed in uncovering that attestation phenomenologically, together with what it attests, then the problem will arise anew as to whether the anticipation of death, which we have hitherto projected only in its ontological possibility, has an essential connection with authentic ability to be, which has been attested. In other words, can you live it? What is it to live your mortality? And that's the end of the chapter. So now, that gets him to where I'm convinced he should have been already a long time back, namely to talking about guilt and resoluteness. And that's on the next page. So now we're on 312. And conscience calls us to our being guilty, and then we act on it. When we act on it, we act resolutely. So on 314, conscience summons Dasein to being guilty. And then we hear lots about how it doesn't speak and how you have to listen to it. And what we understand is that conscience calls you to be authentic, not to do any specific thing. And wanting to have a conscience is a good thing because it's wanting to be authentic. And you are always, but having a conscience isn't being guilty. Conscience calls you to face up to and manifest the fact that you are constantly, always, structurally guilty. And that means always thrown in a way that you can't get clear of and you can't get clear about. We talked about that already, so I'm going to just keep going. So we've got conscience. I don't think I need conscience calls you strictly to nothing, he says on 318. It calls Dasein forth. It forces Dasein to out of the they and so forth. We don't need any of that for where I'm trying to get. So let's go to 321. So there we get to the anxiety that goes with throwingness, and that's in italics, 2/3 of the way down. Again, it's about a kind of nothingness, a kind of uncanniness. Remember that uncanniness is unheimlich in German, which means I would choose to translate it weird. Now I think the right way to translate it is unsettled. And Heidegger's trying to say that it's ungrounded is the thing he's really thinking about. It's unrooted. There's no basis that it can count on when it acts. So uncanniness reveals itself authentically in the Befindlichkeit of anxiety. It brings Dasein face to face with the nothing of the world, and Dasein finds its uncanniness, and so forth. And that is Dasein's at the bottom of the page, primordial, thrown, being in the world as not at home. That's the unheimlich. The bare that it is, the nothing of the world, and all that, which we had already in Division 1. I'm going to get to the part where he puts them together, but since I can't understand the part where he puts them together, I'm trying to lead up to it in such a way that somebody can understand it. So now I think there are two nothings. We've done the nothing of Dasein. That's the nullity of death. And now we've got, in effect, the nothing of the world, as he says back here. That is, there's a kind of way in which the world is, you're never at home in it, and period. And that, I don't really have a feeling for that kind of uncanniness, I must admit. I think some other people do. I think, I can't tell whether I'd ever expected the world to be more grounded than it really is, and therefore I don't feel unsettled, or I think it is more grounded than it really is. If anybody has a feeling for unsettledness and this kind of anxiety, say something about it, you can see it in movies and books. That's the best I can do. The famous movies of unsettledness are all the Antonioni movies with Monica Vitti wandering around in a world in which she just can't relate to anything, not the people or the things. Nothing matters, and nothing grabs her. And have any of you read the Moviegoer of Walker Percy? That's a great book. That's totally about anxiety, written by Walker Percy after he'd read Heidegger, Kierkegaard. He was an MD, and then he got tuberculosis and spent a lot of time in a hospital and read existentialist stuff, and then he wrote the Moviegoer. And it's just like Antonioni movies. This woman who's the moviegoer likes to hang around in deserted movie houses in the suburbs because nothing's happening and nothing matters. And it's the exact opposite of the Italian stock market. I switched to Antonioni movies, where Monica Vitti comes in at one point and sees her lover in the Italian stock market, where everybody is so utterly frantic, as if their life depended on selling these stocks right now. And she looks at them as if they're some alien form of life. And but I don't directly understand the uncanniness of the world. Does anybody want to help me out? Yeah. Wait, let's close. Will somebody close? Wait, I couldn't hear you. Will somebody close the door? There's a conversation picking up out there. Now try again. Yeah. I don't think that's the right experience. It's this very world right here, clear as day, you all sitting here, which is unsettled and unheimlich. And, well, yes, I guess covered up, but it isn't as if to uncover it would be for things to come apart in some way and get fuzzy or full of surprises. That's not what's covered up. I can't I really wish somebody could tell me. I would love examples. Thank goodness for the movies anyway. But right now, I mean, you've heard me say this, some of you probably. Once I was teaching the anxiety part in Division 1, and some student ran out of the room and threw up. That's the right kind of reaction. I wish I could understand what was going on in that student's mind. Yeah, I've heard of it. Okay, well that's closer. Now, if you could understand, like why we here, right here in the West, in our own culture, right at home in our university, are feeling the same thing somehow as somebody like Said would feel that's the problem. I mean, I could understand how I could feel at home if you transported me to well, I don't know, some country Japan. I've been there. It's pretty strange. In an amazing way. But the point is, we're supposed to be covering up the fact that we're not at home right now here, and what that feels like, I don't know. Did you want to say anything about Stevens? Okay. Now if you can only move us one step further, but we're supposed to be anxious right now. Always, constantly, if we're authentic. There are two kinds of anxiety, the shattering kind. So, this is back to, you've all had Division 1 with me, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but remember that Division 1 is about what kind of thing Stephen's talking about, where all of a sudden the world withdraws and just shows up as meaningless, pure, present at hand, and nothing matters, and you can't understand why anybody does anything, and you're paralyzed. That kind of anxiety is, I haven't experienced it, but I could, at least if I did experience it, I know I think I'd recognize it. But what about the anxiety that the authentic person happily, constantly, steadfastly lives in and takes very seriously, and only gives up when it's really totally, it becomes impossible to do it? I mean, you do realize that, I mean, sometimes, for instance, if you read Blattner on anxiety, you wouldn't ever realize that the authentic Dasein is always anxious. Do anybody know? I'm always looking for this quote when I want it, and I never can find it, where he lists the characteristics of authentic Dasein, and in it is that Dasein is anxious. And so it can't be a breakdown of the meaning of everything. It's a sense just of the ungroundedness of everything. I guess it's a sense maybe that it could all break down. I don't even know if that's part of it. I doubt it. There's something I wanted to say about, just a second. Oh, well, maybe it helps. I mean, it's sort of a non-rootedness he talks about. It's I think this is too, I mean, I think I'm more like Heidegger than he is at this point. I mean, later Heidegger is going to say that it's sort of Western European to be non-rooted, but that it's possible to be rooted, and that he wants to help propose a new rootedness. And then all this attempt to try to explain why authentic Dasein is always anxious because we're always unrooted isn't. You don't have to do that anymore. But in this, he certainly he's having an experience otherwise. You're looking concerned about what I just said, right? No, yeah. Are you upset about that? I just see that it's arbitrary, and why bother? So you think just your story is I'm in it all the time. That's why I can't see it. Yeah. With what? With not. Yeah, that's right. Yes, good. Let's put that in there. The collapsing kind of anxiety is what you get when you are inside Das Man, and it looks like everything has intrinsic meaning. It looks like Christmas cards just better be sent on Christmas, or who knows what bad thing will happen to you. And then you get this sudden realization, well, this is an absolutely weird thing. And when you go to other cultures, you get it more. So but if you're out of Das Man, then your being in constant anxiety is just the sense that there isn't any way one ought to do it, that you have to do it that way. Your intrinsic meaning story has collapsed, and the first stage of it collapsing is the Division 1 story about paralysis. And then if you go back into the world the right way, authentically, then you'll still do what Das Man asks you to do most of the time. You're not going to go around taking your clothes off or something. And there are norms, and you obey the norms, but you no longer think of them as intrinsically the right way to do things. Or what I think sometimes is that there's always this feeling, and even I can't get over it all. I mean, that there's the right way to sit, for instance, and that is in chairs. It's healthier, it's more comfortable, it's in every way clearly superior. And then there are these weird people who squat on the floor at tables, otherwise seemingly sophisticated people, like the Japanese. And there are other people who sit on the floor altogether. And there might have been a bunch of people, there don't seem to be any, that do everything they do standing up. But anyway, the idea that there is something that one does which is because it's the right way to do it, that's what goes away when you have this anxiety attack. And that's what somebody who lives in it just sees all the time, that this is all just arbitrary, and there's no one way that's better than the other. And you do what one does because you got to do something and be intelligible, not because it's the right way. Is that? I guess so. But as I said, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I would have to tell people the story of my life, and that would be a digression. Because I mean, you know things about me that make you say, okay, yes, well, yeah, right. And people stopping at stoplights in the middle of the night. Hans, I mean, apparently in China that people think that's the funniest thing in the world, that people sit in the middle of an empty street with all coming into the center and nobody's anywhere, and they're waiting patiently for the light to change and go green. I feel the same way. I've always felt the same way. I don't wait. But I don't understand why anybody does. But it's like that. Yeah, Hans Fluge has this funny story. I haven't heard him mention it lately. When he was in Berlin, seeing it was maybe 20 years ago, I guess, seeing a hippie with studs on their jacket and rings and everything, very, very sort of anti-social, at midnight, waiting patiently on the street corner for the light to change. And that person hasn't really got it yet. So did I see another hand? If not, I'm going back. Yeah.
One student doesn't vote with multitudes as opposed to one. It's very much uneasy the way one does. They're obviously starting to relative to what one does.
Yeah, I think you got an interesting point there, which is perhaps, since I've become the example of this, I have this tendency to think, because I just said with the street light and so forth, that there's a right way to do it. Namely, when there's nobody around, you should go. Why waste your time? And so forth. And I tend to think, I mean, the trees are valuable, and that sending people Christmas cards who are across the street is wrong. And I have that's right. I'm not anxious enough. I see that now. That's interesting. Yes, if I were really anxious, I wouldn't have such a sense that if I were running the country, there wouldn't be people waiting at street lights and so forth. That's wrong. Good point. Now, another hand I saw, and then I'm going to go back to this, or didn't I? Yeah, okay.
Is it possible that some of this is made? It seems to me the way you're describing it, that this is all made on
the depression. Depression, did you say? Yes. Well, that's an interesting thing you should say that, because Heidegger later describes the same phenomena that he called anxiety, and he calls it depression. And I think that's another way of saying it looks like Heidegger may be talking about a particular stage of German angst or something when he's thinking about it. And but I don't know. I mean, there are two different things. The breakdown one might be depression. You don't want to confuse things. When you're sitting there and you can't understand why anybody would do anything and you just can't get up from your chair. I've heard people who are really depressed say that they a very important person to me, and a therapist who was on Prozac, tried going away from stopped taking the Prozac, and she said then she could just sit in the chair and there was no reason for her to move, and she couldn't move, so she had to go back on it. Okay, but that's different. The question is, it doesn't seem like depression to say that you don't believe that there's a right way of doing things. Neither the Das Man way, or, as Tyler now says, even your own way. There are just a whole lot of different ways of doing things, and there's no ground for that. The only thing that bothers me is I don't understand, and I'm back to where we started, why that's upsetting. But I think it is. I think it's upsetting to people who think that there are rules for how to do things and do things right, and those rules either are grounded in reason or revelation or nature, and they would be very upset if it turned out that all these different ways of life were equally all right and none of them the right way. Maybe that we're not so much among them. Maybe I'm more among them than I thought I was. Yeah.
The feeling of depression from the state of one who has a condition of depression, in the sense that one who's feeling depressed, for example, has that initial anxiety. The world is suddenly void of meaning. All meaning sinks out, and you just stand there and wonder, like, why does anyone do anything? Everything's so trivial. But after you overcome that feeling, then yet you know that, for example, you have to deal with the world in a different way, because you know that create or others create for you, or that are around you, they themselves are always vulnerable to that. That at any moment, the same event could happen, the same effect could strike you, that suddenly everything becomes meaningless. And I think, of course, certain people deal with that in different ways, they have to. Some of them sort of see the world and...
Wait, stop. I mean, maybe. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, except I want to go back to this. I mean, we're getting too far into the phenomenology of anxiety, and there's so much I want to cover. What? Okay. Thanks. Come and talk to me more about it. I'm all for hearing the phenomena, but not right now. So we got two nullities, 331. Why am I jumping to 331? I have to go back. 321, 323. Well, the nullities I already mentioned. They're in 331. So I just call your attention to that. There's the nullity of projection, and that's tied up with the nullity of guilt. And there's the nullity of thrownness, the next paragraph, the second paragraph on 331. The structure of thrownness, there lies essential nullity, as there is in projection. And so care is permeated with nullity through and through. And Dasein is guilty, and now we go back to that again. Formerly existential definition of guilt as being the basis of a nullity is correct. So that there you have really got guilt completely formalized. And the question is whether death ever gets formalized that much. Notice that all this talk about on 330, this talk about nullity doesn't have death in it. Now I'm trying to again tell you what I think is so peculiar about the way the book is organized. I mean, death has got lots of talk about nullity. Now then you get to the part on guilt, and it's as if guilt is the main story about nullity on 333. So uncanniness brings you to guilt, and conscience says Dasein is a null basis of a null projection, and it's therefore guilty. I mean, here's one of these places where I'm confused. You would have thought if he's got a null projection, it's about death. I've always supposed that there was thrownness, and its kind of nullity was guilt, and there is projection, and its kind of nullity is death. But here you get lots of talk about thrownness, and lots of talk about nullity, and even talk about the nullity of understanding, which is where is that? Just a second, on 333. What am I looking at? Where, let's see, defines all the talk of nullity without reference to death. I just said, oh, well, it's all, but where is the understanding part about nullity? Am I imagining it when I was reading it? There's thrownness, so as to understand the thrownness, the null basis. Well, it's just that the call of being guilty and conscience doesn't call you to face up to your possibility of no more possibilities at all. Here, it's all done in terms of guilt, and yet he's already done death, so why doesn't he bring it in? Well, he does finally on 334, when it turns out that the call at the top is readiness for the to the ownmost possibility of existence, and the ownmost possibility of existence, you would have thought was death, but it's all done here in terms of guilt. And I just think this is a sign that the thing is confused. I mean, why didn't, if he could introduce the guilt part here and then the death part later, but having done a whole big thing about death and the possibility of no more possibilities, and that death is your ownmost possibility, doesn't he say that? He does. And now here we are at the top of 334, and it turns out guilt seems to be the ownmost possibility. Am I misreading? I think he's just confused. You think... yes, but that was... I thought the completely yours was supposed to be what death gave you in its individuating character. And that was the sort of feature of death. But now we're not... He's doing it as to guilt and the call of conscience as getting you to the ownmost possibility. You think that's supposed to be the same ownmost possibility that is the one he talks about in the death chapter? It should be. Okay. They both individuate you. I see. So death and guilt, each in their own way, individuate you. And they're both ownmost. I guess. When he introduces the ownmost in the death thing, he seems to make it sound as if it's a very special characteristic of the way death individuates. But you think that? Maybe not. Anyway, it better not be, because it looks like there are two different ownmosts and two different individuations, and now he's doing the guilt one. There's certainly no talk about death in here. So, okay. Well, I think we have to agree with, we have to do with what Eugene said. We have to think that there's just two different stories about what's ownmost. And your thrownness is ownmost. And so I think that's hard to get, because you see what I mean? Because there's something about the way death isolates you, and nobody can die your death. It doesn't look like guilt isolates you and nobody can have your thrownness. No, that's a non-relational. That's right, but guilt doesn't have, you mean ownmost doesn't have to be non-relational. Well, I guess you're right. It doesn't have to be. I would have said it did, but clearly it doesn't. Your ownmost thrownness, but maybe it doesn't even, and it doesn't even individuate you, it looks like, right? I think you got me off track in a way by throwing individuate in here. I think ownmost with death individuates, but ownmost with guilt doesn't individuate. Because the individuation's already been done for you, so that's death's job. If they all have the same job, it would be sort of less interesting. It doesn't say it individuates it. Well, what would it be to be ownmost and not be individuating? I don't know. Well, I see we're caught in between. I mean, either it looks like it ought to be ownmost and individuating, and then it's going to be exactly the way but that has to do with nobody being able to die for you, nobody being able to step in for you when he does it with death. And now, what does ownmost mean when it isn't individuating and it isn't isolating and all that? Then did I see a hand? It's just sort of architectonic. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
You'll call forth the Dasein to be authentic, and isn't the authenticity?
Guilt, certainly, with a conscience particularly, calls you to be authentic. And if it's calling you to be authentic, does that individuate you?
It wouldn't individuate.
A type of individual. Well, that's what Eugene is thinking. It gets you away. Good. So, okay, I see what you both are saying. I go along with it now that I see it. So it gets you away from Das Man. In that sense, it individuates you, even though it doesn't have this characteristic of unrelatedness and isolatedness. Yeah. Yeah.
The calling back brings the last part, brings itself back to itself from its authenticity.
Well, that's certainly a hard one. That's very, very tough, because there is something about Dasein, which is this kind of minimal something or other that it has, even when it's even when it's in anxiety and paralyzed and so forth, there is, when I talk to myself about it, I say that sometimes he talks about Dasein in it as that it is and has to be. That seems to be this minimal, and that I think there's another thing. This that it is and has to be has mindness. That's somehow rock bottom. Mindness isn't the same as being individuated. I don't know what exactly mindness is. Something like, if anybody does, they should let me know. Sometimes I think it's first person perspective, but I'm not even sure that's right. But so, and there is something, let me finish this thought, called authentic Dasein, which is not the Dasein of Das Man, and not authentic Dasein either. And Heidegger says that both authentic Dasein and inauthentic Das Man Dasein are existential modifications of something which is the existential authentic Dasein. You remember this passage? We talked about this passage once, didn't we? And that it makes it look like there's some sort of kernel. I have no idea what to say about this. There's some kind of something or other that Dasein has, whether it's acting in the Das Man way or paralyzed or acting in an authentic way, and that's the thing you're talking about, I think, when it calls it back to itself. Is that what the passage? What is the passage? Because the constancy of the self is a big deal, and that comes up later. And for that, you have to have steadfastness and a kind of commitment and so forth. But I don't think that's the self here. Show me where the passage is. Okay, let me read it and see if I can tell. Calling back, not just calls for us in the Dasein. Go back to itself. Its losses in the run back. It is to bring itself back to itself. And what is itself? Well, it's worth talking about. Does anybody have more to say? I think it's the that it is and has to be, and in which it takes a stand on its being. There is some being that is called to take a stand on its being, and that is its authentic. Different sense of authentic. There are two senses of authentic self. There is this minimal sense of authentic self, which is what's called to take a stand on itself in its actions. And then there is this higher kind of authentic self, and that's the self that has taken a stand and got its life together, acting steadfastly and flexibly, and has a constant self. That's it. We know that kind of authentic self is an existential modification of something, just as we know that the Dasein, the self fleeing into Das Man, is an existential modification of something, and I don't know what to say. This is the kind of thing, Curtis, where you usually have something to say. Do you? Okay. Yeah. I think it's a good question. We'll try to answer you for a minute. If we do, we make real progress. Yeah. Now, those sound like the right words, but can you say of that clearing that it is and has to be, that it has mindness? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't. What do you think? You look like you want to say something. Yeah, but I mean, that's the sort of minimal condition that can go and project itself in two ways at least, authentically and inauthentically. Yeah, that's right. There's no kernel of substantive anything, and maybe to say that it's a clearing is to say something like that it's that's what I meant by perspectival. I think of Dasein, when I try to think about this, as a perspectival openness on the world. It can't be just sheer openness on the world, because everybody's open on the world from where they are, and Heidegger knows that. And so is that the minimalist thing, that there's this perspectival clearing, which is a kind of activity? I'm ready to hear more. Yeah, Tyler.
Put something between the existential modifications. Well, you can't have a fiction once there's two potentialities, which are co-primordial. Then you have nothing but alternations between two existential modifications, with nothing in between them. The Dasein is
Okay, that's. I mean, I think that's good, but can you account for this quote where Heidegger says that there is that both authenticity and inauthenticity are existential modifications of authentic Dasein? Doesn't he say that? He does say that, doesn't he? Well, I'll find it. Wait a minute. Let's not, just a second, let's not spend our time explaining something if it's a hallucination of mine. Find the place at the end of Das Mann chapter where he tells you that there are these two modifications. 168, that's it. I was looking at 68 and I wasn't finding it. Okay, now, I have to find the other one, but I mean, I wrote here 365. Let's look at 360. No. There's a place where he talks about them as both modifications. That isn't there, is it? Modification, what? Oh yeah, the authentic self, right. It has been shown that about 15 lines from the bottom, it has been shown that proximally and for the most part, Dasein is not itself, but is lost in the they self, which is an existential modification of the authentic self. Maybe that's just a mistake, because it.
Authentic, existential modification of the inauthentic. Dasein is inauthentic.
What keeps us from it is this sentence. It says that the they self is an existential modification of the authentic self. Maybe that's right. It just dawned on me what you're saying is that these two just go back and forth, and you could even throw in that there's a third existential modification in undifferentiated mode. That those are all sort of modifications that sort of flip back and forth among themselves, but there's no underlying anything. I never thought about that. That's good. I think that's right. Then you have just cleared up something that worried me for ages. Something I wished I'd asked Heidegger. Maybe if I'd asked Heidegger, he would have told me the same thing you just told me. It would be nice to know. Anybody else? So you see the thing now. There's no underlying self, no underlying deep authentic self. I always tried to make it as minimal as possible, but now I think Tyler has made it even more minimal. There is just this flipping back and forth, and maybe we can combine Tyler with me. Is it a flipping back and forth, Tyler, of a perspective on the world, a perspectival way absorbed in the world? Yeah, I think, well, that fits with what you said when you came in to talk to me the other day, that we are just absorbed in the world, don't slip anything in between. Now you put these two things. We are absorbed in the world authentically or inauthentically, and there's no underlying core self, and there's certainly no mental representations in between, so we would be this active perspectival openness on the world, or absorption in the world would be better. Active perspectival absorption in the world, which flips back and forth between being authentic, inauthentic, or undifferentiated. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but I like it. Because now somebody should run out of the room and throw up to confirm that we've got it right. Yeah.
This kind of modularity, this modulation between these two, it's only self kind of appears through things.
Okay, well, we could jump ahead because I think, wasn't it even in today's assignment? I'm trying to remember where he finally. No, it isn't, but I can get there. He tells you what the constancy of the self is, which is exactly what you're talking about. And the constancy of the self is just the steadfastness of whatever you're committed to. I think I wrote it at the very end of my notes. I did, so let me find steadfast, 369. As long as we're on the subject, we've jumped ahead of the assignment, haven't we? What were you supposed to be reading for today? From 349 to 358. Yeah, I've just jumped ahead, but never mind. Read it anyway. Here we are. If we're going to talk about the self and the subjectum, which it would be just the wrong thing, of course. The subjectum is the underlying core that has the properties. That's Descartes. That would be the rig.
Wait, three. You say
Oh yeah, that's right. He says that every once in a while. That's part of it. And why would you think that there was a self-substance? Well, there is something, and he's talking about it in the bottom of 369. So let's read it. Selfhood, I'm right in the middle of 369. Selfhood is to be discerned existentially only in one's authentic ability to be itself. That is to say, in the authenticity of Daseinist care. In terms of care, the constancy of the self is the supposed persistence of a subjectum gets clarified. That the phenomenon of this authentic ability to be opens our eyes to the constancy of the self in the sense of having achieved some sort of position or taken a stand, I think that means. That's having an issue for it. The constancy of the self is the double sense of steadiness and in the double sense of steadiness and steadfastness is the authentic counter possibility of the non-constancy, which is irresolute falling. Existentially, self-constancy signifies nothing other than anticipatory. Oh, that's why I marked it in my notes. Yeah. Finally, anticipatory resoluteness is brought together in that little paragraph where he brings he hadn't brought in the constancy and the steadiness and the steadfastness before. The steadiness and steadfastness is crucial, and it goes with the resoluteness. The picture of this, I'm pretty sure that it is right, that I have, and that I don't claim it's anything original, is that the death part, the anticipatory part, it gives you flexibility, he says. You're ready to give anything up. And the resoluteness makes you steadfast. I don't know why the response to your throwingness is to make you steadfast. And do you? I mean, but that doesn't seem to be what happens. Or am I making that up? You look like it.
Going forward and running forward. So it's not just being willing to give things up. It's really
okay. It's okay, but it does the job of making you flexible. I'm thinking of the passage about not being too old for victories. Anticipation, meaning the possibility of having to give everything up, makes you flexible and able to give anything specific up. I see. That's interesting. Where is that passage? Let's look for it. It's in what we were talking about. I mean, I want to know how it relates to anticipation, and because I thought I didn't read flexibility into it. That's why I want to find it. It isn't just not being too old for victories. That is, taking what you can get when you sort of win. But okay, let me look at 308. Why do I think it's got to do with flexibility? It's because he talks about shattering all tenaciousness to whatever existence one has reached. That's about 10 lines from the bottom of 308. And I think he wants to say that when you're acting authentically, you are neither flaky nor fanatical. That's the stick. You stick with it, but you don't get stuck with it. And he thinks that the death part, possibilities are really necessary or guaranteed, makes you flexible, and now this is the part I don't understand. Knowing that you are thrown and are the null basis of a projection makes you steadfast. Why make you steadfast? I really don't know. But I think that and those two together is what is. By the way, we're talking now about the attestation or the manifestation. What is it to manifest being anticipatory resolute? How do you behave when you're anticipatorily resolute? And then you hear about not being tenacious and being steadfast as two of the features of it. Yeah. That has fads, he says, right? And I don't remember the stubborn, but it certainly gets hooked on things that it keeps for ages, yeah.
So when you get away from all that, that makes you resolute because you're not being...
That seems that's a fat move. I mean, I could see you getting away from the flakiness of Das Man without you could become fanatical. You could become, I don't know, I mean, that's to be steadfast is to commit yourself to something that really defines you until it becomes impossible and you have to give it up. Yes, it's not being distracted. And the Das Man is always distracted. Okay, but then that's a big jump. So being accepting you're being guilty, which is that you're a null basis of a nullity, gets you out of Das Man, we talked a lot about that, and gets you into, now I'm trying to get used to that, into committing to yourself to something and sticking with it in a way that Das Man doesn't do. But why do you do that? That's just how it is. I mean, that's not. I can see that it's what the one doesn't do, but why is it that accepting your null basis of a nullity makes you do?
Their natural tendency to do it doesn't.
Okay, and we have a natural tendency to take a stand on our being and stick to that stand. It seems. Why, I don't quite know. But let's go on. Somebody did I see your hand up, Tyler? Somebody had a hand up over here. Okay, well, I want to fill in the missing piece, because maybe when you see it, you'll have an answer to it. Because I remember that I made notes here, and we just haven't come to them yet, where he makes the move to steadfastness, in effect. Let me try to see where we are. We're trying to look at how when you manifest the fact that you can't get behind your throwingness. That's where we should be. So let me see where I am. 349. There's a place where I'll just sort of thinking out loud. What I'm looking for is a place where he says that, in effect, because he's trying to explain why we are constant in our behavior. And he's saying that there is the constant threat. I think it's anticipation that makes us constant. And that's odd. Now I have to find it. He talks about, he makes a move to constancy on the basis of something that I have to find. Try 353. Constant. Yeah, this is it. And he does it, as I thought, on the basis of guilty. Now, how does he get, this is the thing I was talking to Eugene about, how does he get from accepting being guilty to having something constant in your life? He does it by saying, well, being guilty is something constant in your life. So if you're going to act in such a way as to manifest your being guilty, then you better act in such a way as to have something constant in your life. That doesn't seem right. Maybe I'm making that up. Did you see the paragraph? He doesn't say that? Let's hope not. Everybody read on their own what's going on 353. So he doesn't get, I guess I'm wrong, he doesn't get the constancy out of the fact that you're constantly guilty. He just says that you should constantly express in whatever you do that you are guilty. And that is okay. I'm still worried about that. All this about taking it back and not becoming rigid is on 355. He's going back to that again, only in the context of, well, now he's doing anticipatory resoluteness, he says at the bottom of 354. And he's telling you about flexibility, and he ought to be telling you about constancy, resolving to keep repeating itself. Is that just repeating that it's thrown a null basis of a nullity, or some specific commitment? No, I don't see any place where he tries to derive or claims to have shown why we are called to be constant or steadfast. That's what we're looking for. Okay, let's see. What page is that? One. Okay, well, that was exactly where I tried to get it, and I didn't get it. Did you?
When you accept the possibility of death.
And you think that's a fast move, or it's okay? Yeah, I wrote down fast move for exactly that point. It seems like but that does seem to be where he's doing it. Now, lower down on that page, he does just the opposite. He gets the view that you're constantly flexible and never become rigid. And the certainty, and how does that play in there? These, by the way, are the absolute. I began when I came in saying I do not understand what is going on. It was in 354, 355, around here, where he brings together anticipation and thoroughness or resoluteness, and gets anticipatory resoluteness. Then everything seems to be just turning around in a way that I don't know even what the argument is supposed to be. But out of it becomes being able to not become rigid but not be resolute either. I mean, irresolute either. So you're resolute but not rigid, and that's about it. Okay, I wanted to talk about a third thing. Let me just up with my page numbers, because then I will talk about the third thing I want to talk about. 343. No, that's okay. Well, does anybody know this is a different thing, but maybe we can get it off the table in a hurry? Oh, this all solves the problem of wholeness? It looks to me like never solves the problem of wholeness. I don't know what the problem of wholeness was, but whatever it was, it looks like it's still around. And every once in a while he says we haven't solved the problem of wholeness, and then he goes on for a few more pages. So I think the wholeness is a fake problem that he got at the beginning in this funny methodological way, and then he says, look, we have to have Dasein as a whole, but Dasein is always outstanding part of it, and so how are we going to deal with that? And what he tells you is instead of wholeness, there's an authentic Dasein has constancy and a unified way of acting, namely flexible and steadfast. But I don't see that tells you that it's whole. I don't even know what it means. You think it solves the problem of wholeness?
When you get there, you see the possibilities ahead of it, so you see yourself as a whole way.
You see all of it. How do you see all of it? I don't understand you. Did he really say that?
Yes.
Isn't that sort of strange? How can it know that? It's sort of clairvoyant. I mean, so you look like you know something. No, okay. Well, okay. I don't know what to say about that. So I'm going to go on to what I want to say one more thing about. I say here I just don't know how to deal with wholeness. Now I want to say. This is the last thing. I'm trying to make my case that he's got the book in this screwed up order, and finally he sort of faces all these weird questions which he shouldn't have to face on 349. Remember what the issue is. I mean, I claim that if he had only done resoluteness first, and then he could have said, and the extremist form of resoluteness is anticipatory resoluteness, because I think he should have said, resoluteness shows you the ungroundedness of the shared practices, and you're no way able to justify the shared practices. But the anticipatory resoluteness shows the ungroundedness of the whole culture, and then he could have, and that would see. I'm not being very clear, but I'll become clear. So he tries to claim that somehow anticipation is somehow the most extreme form of resoluteness, and he keeps saying that. And yet he does anticipation before he does resoluteness. So I think he's right. Anticipation is the most extreme form of resoluteness, because in death you take everything back, and somehow that's more extreme than not getting behind your thrownness. But now I want to just point out, maybe nobody disagrees with me, and I'm just tilting at windmills, but what he's constantly saying, maybe nobody disagrees. I want to say he constantly says that anticipation is sort of the extremist form of resoluteness, and that it's kind of the teleology of resoluteness, that resoluteness hasn't gone all the way, but if you go all the way with resoluteness, then you get it wholly, then you get anticipatory resoluteness. Now maybe nobody, and the only reason I want to stress that is I want to say that's my evidence that it's in the wrong order. If resoluteness just goes halfway, so to speak, to anticipatory resoluteness, then stick with doing it. Well, now let me give you quotes. I mean, one thing, you get all these questions, how in the world do you get death together with the concrete situation? How do you get the two phenomena of anticipation and resoluteness brought together? And then he gives his sort of answer in near the bottom, in italics. Does resoluteness in its own most existential tendency of being point forward to anticipatory resoluteness as its own most authentic possibility? That's what I call this sort of teleological claim, that resoluteness sort of works itself out as anticipation. It's on page 350 also. Well, no, he's just talking again. How are we going to get into resoluteness together with anticipation? And he's going to he wants to know how to do it in a non-arbitrary way. And he says every once in a while, I'll just read you one more time, how it's a sort of teleological story that resoluteness is, if it's fully worked out, gets you anticipation. On 352 at the bottom. When resoluteness has been thought through to the end in a way corresponding to its own most tendency of being, see, that's what I call the teleology. To what extent does it lead us to authentic being towards death? How are we to conceive the connection? Well, somehow we're supposed to. We're supposed to understand that the full or extreme form of resoluteness, which is and it's been defined as accepting your guilt, which means defined as understanding that you're a basis, the null basis nullity. How does all that get you to anticipation? It doesn't. I mean, you have to throw in death to get from guilt and resoluteness to anticipatory resoluteness. That's what death does. And so, and another way at the bottom of the middle paragraph on 353, resoluteness does not just have a connection with anticipation or with something other. It harbors in itself authentic being towards death as the possible existential modality of its own and then he says we should elicit this phenomenologically, but I don't think he ever does. But first I just want to tell you that notice that he's got this claim, and then when you want to find out what the claim is, on 354 and 355, it is extremely murky. But you hear it again at the top of 354, third line. Resoluteness is primordially that which it tends to. Sorry, what is that? It maintains itself authentically in it as if resoluteness is primordially what it tends to be. That means what? That resoluteness turns into death. Yeah. But we have revealed that Dasein's primordial being towards its potentiality, its ability to be, is being towards death, and so forth. And thus only as anticipating does resoluteness become a primordial being towards Dasein's own most ability to be. All of this is that, and now the question is, what's the phenomena that he's got? Why does he want to say that resoluteness is, so to speak, a tendency toward anticipatory resoluteness? I don't think he ever explains it. If he does, I've missed it. And he's moving very fast through there. But he could have explained it. And I think what it ought to be, and I just already, and it's in the paper I gave you, that if you try to figure it out, then you could say that, remember that resoluteness goes with the phronemus. It goes with response to the unique situation. It goes with taking action. And that's what manifests the fact that the phronemus, the resolute Dasein, is no longer just doing what one does and responding to the general situation, but responding to the unique situation. But I think that if you define it that way and describe it that way, then resoluteness is on the background of a culture that's taken for granted. And what I really think is that the phronemus and the resoluteness story is the Greek half of his story, and that's fine. And what he thinks is, just to put it very provocatively, sort of Christianity is the teleology of Greece, or the Aristotelian phronemus is a step toward Jesus. What I mean by that crazy claim is that he thinks that you need to understand the possibility of total world collapse, which is the meaning that your whole culture, the whole Greek antique world could disappear and the new Christian world could come along. He hasn't really fully worked that out yet, but he will, and then he'll say on that, in Carol White will say that the medieval world has to die so that the modern world can be born. It's that he's heading toward. Let me say it again, that the resoluteness just tells you you should not don't do what one does because it looks like it's the right thing to do. And now with Tyler's correction of me, and don't do the opposite of what one does as if that was the right thing to do. It's all from resoluteness you get the Frontimus who just does the appropriate thing. It's neither what one does or opposed to what one does, and it doesn't even have any generalization like chairs are to sit on. Each situation, the Frontimus does the appropriate thing on the background of a Greek understanding of what it is to be a human being. The Frontimus doesn't call into question the ungroundedness of the culture. It just calls into question the ungroundedness of anything that one does when one responds to the general situation. To call into question the ungroundedness of the culture would be world collapse, and that's death. I mean, the death part of it is that all your possibilities could be annihilated, or all the possibilities of the culture could be annihilated. And then you'd have a whole new world. And you don't get that in Being and Time. That's why he's got all this squeamishness about tendencies and teleologies and stuff. See, I'm telling a story in which it makes perfect sense to say that you haven't wholly understood the Frontimus and the anxiety of guilt until you go all the way and understand the ungroundedness of all the background practices that make up the culture. So when he keeps saying anticipation, the right way of expressing Dasein's mortality is the full form of the ungroundedness and therefore transformableness of everything. And so he will say things like, otherwise I don't know how we can explain how the death and anticipation are somehow already implicit as the tendency of resoluteness, and that full resoluteness will be the total, will be living in terms of the possibility of total world collapse. He gets that far. And I'm just trying to say what he does when he gets that far is really move from Greek to Christian, or in the paper I gave you, from Kairos to Augenblick, where Kairos is seize the moment. That's what the Frontimus does. Augenblick is how the whole world is changed in the twinkling of an eye. That's what Augenblick is the twinkling of an eye, and that's a Christian concept. And Aristotle and the Greeks never, and the Frontimus never thought that the whole civilization could be changed into another civilization. They thought they had the right one. Now somebody had a hand up. Yeah, go ahead, James. Yeah, I see. The Frontimus is resolute. Yeah, but notice that somehow. Yes, but only the relative ungroundedness somehow, the ungroundedness of the current. Remember the Frontimus responds to the unique situation, not the general situation. But if you picture the Frontimus responding to the unique situation, it's on the background of lots of shared practices. But then you're on the right track. He thinks that if you pushed it all the way, you would have to see that everything was contingent. All the practices, the whole culture was contingent. But I don't think that when the Frontimus does see that, and that's the sense in which. Here's the question: in what sense is resoluteness not fully understanding the human condition until you add the anticipatory? And I'm trying to say what I think that means.
What I'm wanting to get clear about, is how much you can see the part of resoluteness from an understanding of guilt.
Okay, well, I see the point.
But that constancy passage here where he says, moreover, Dasein is essentially guilty, not just guilty on some occasions, blah, 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 to project oneself upon this being guilty, which Dasein is as long as it is.
That's all true, and yet somehow resoluteness is not. There's something missing from resoluteness that only death and anticipation can add, something that resoluteness is tending toward, and if you pushed it all the way, would be, namely, the total the sense of the groundlessness of everything. But there must be something that he thinks resoluteness hasn't got, because he thinks that it's this teleology story, that if it was fully worked out, it would be anticipatory, and it isn't fully worked out. If you just live in resoluteness, you don't call, I think, you don't call into question your culture.
Here, you want to say Dasein can be resolute, and resoluteness is the projection of being guilty. But
Yeah.
Dasein,
There's something that doesn't go all the way. I mean, remember the lines? It says something like, "It isn't holy, it isn't complete. It's got a tendency, but it hasn't realized its tendency." All of that. That means that and again, I only feel at home when I understand the phenomena. The phronimist never goes all the way. The phronimist believes that the Athenians are the highest human beings, are rational animals, and that we all are, or whatever. I mean, there's a whole lot of taken for granted stuff that the phronimist doesn't question. It's what Aristotle teaches in his ethics course. Well, you call the phronimist resolute. Well, you see, no, but the reason I think that is not only because he uses the terms of responding to the unique situation and all the sort of jargon of phronesis, but that's not the important thing. He says there's something that resoluteness hasn't gone all the way, that it isn't complete, that it has a tendency, but you haven't gone all the way till you add anticipatory. Anticipatory has to do with death, and death has to do with total world collapse, I think. Tyler.
Culture. I think what
It's what?
cultural. So it's very resolute to be an appropriate response.
I see. Okay, but then, good, maybe, but tell me the story again. In what?
The only resolution includes anticipation. Anticipation is
the fully worked out implications of resolution. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
individuation. So not only from the one to culture, but realizing that any culture wants to.
It's funny. I follow you up to the last move, because then you and I are saying the same things about culture, and then the
Individuation and possibility. So you have two forms which make possible the structure of being born. That is potential, which would be.
Oh, wow. Well, wait, stop with that. I mean, if he does say that, that's very interesting. You made a really interesting, strong claim. I doubt if he says it, that you want to make resoluteness existentielle and anticipation existential.
Concretely, in the whole content, no one's guilty, be resolute. That concrete attestation is made possible by an ontological structure, which also individual.
Well, we should keep a look. Show me the text. I don't believe it, but it's got the same kind of general point that I have. You've got to have some way of trying to say what it is that resoluteness has something, but it doesn't have everything. And then you get anticipation, you add something more. Eugene wants to say something, and then no, come on, I'm sure you did. I did. We got time.
I think maybe everybody's right. Bartolomé says he does hear the words of the culture and what the culture calls, and he masters that. So the Bartolomé is in touch with his culture's way, and the rest wasn't.
That's right. But it's Heidegger who threw in all of a sudden the astronomer's stuff about responding to the unique situation as what you do when you manifest resoluteness. He does seem to be saying that. Or maybe I'm reading that in.
The good. You want to take that out. Well, that might be the difference.
Okay. Well, we have to look it up, but let me tell everybody else so in less code. I mean, it's true that the phronomist does what he does for the sake of the good. Interestingly enough, Heidegger leaves it out when he does the phenomenology of the phronomist responding to the unique situation. But I put it in because I think Heidegger knows it, and I don't think he would want to leave. Needs to leave it out. But the question is, if the phronomist then would have to either not be fully resolute because he's still buying into the Athenian idea of the good, or my way of understanding it is that somehow resoluteness doesn't go all the way. I don't know why, but it looks like he keeps saying resolute. It isn't just the phronomist. It's resoluteness, which has a tendency to be wholly manifest in anticipation. Why can't resoluteness wholly manifest itself? What is it that anticipation manifests that resolution lacks? That's what I'm trying to figure out. It could, okay, but then I'm interested in the resoluteness one. The phronomist one was just my entrance into the resoluteness. The question really is, what is incomplete about resoluteness, which is on the right track and tends toward anticipatory resoluteness, but lacks something that anticipatory resoluteness has? That's the question, and I don't know the answer. But you haven't said anything. You can say something. That's right. Anticipation organizes your activity. That seems to be right. That's sure.
But then there's a further question. Now that you have that leeway that to comport authentically, it seems like that there's no organization built in there. You could just respond. You could keep responding to the closest possible way.
I see. You want to say the anticipation organizes the whole of your life under some one of the up to the end and so forth. Yes, that might be right.
On free observation.
That's not different from Tyler either in a way. What you're doing, all three of you, or at least both of you, I don't know about Eugene Piet, is saying, well, there's something about a fully authentic human life that resoluteness lacks, that being towards death adds. It's not about culture and whether you radically question your culture at all. I'm beginning to be convinced. And your way of putting it is helpful. So it's not enough that moment by moment with resoluteness, the Fronomius constantly, but each time just punctually, at each moment, does the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. He's got no unified, long-range life. There's nothing about the constancy of the Fronomius. If he has anything, he has a lot of flexibility, but it's not the kind that Heidegger's interested in. And you're saying, aha, and what do you add when you add anticipatory? You add that somehow the style of your life, let's put it, from beginning to end, is a life of a mortal. And that's beyond what the Aristotelian Fronomius has. He doesn't have a style of life that goes from beginning to end, or at least that kind of style that expresses the deepest nature of what it is to be a human being. You don't have that unless you have anticipatory resoluteness. And Heidegger doesn't tell us that the Fronomius doesn't have it, but I think it's clear the way it's positioned in the book that the Fronomius is manifesting resoluteness, and that resoluteness hasn't got everything that it needs. It hasn't got anticipatory. And I'm agreeing with you completely, and both of you. And when it gets anticipatory, it becomes the style of a whole life. And that's a radically different issue than my issue, which might be right too, but not Heidegger's, of questioning sort of from within the culture and being or seeing the contingency of the whole culture. That's not what's on Heidegger's mind at this point. I'm really bringing later Heidegger in when I talk about world collapse. Okay, right. Boy, of course, it all points to temporality.
Your disclosure disclose that the possibilities of transparency are not just significant for the here and now, but they're being projected onto an end that permanent possibility that's never actualized. So it's almost like, you're free from Das Man, but you're not yet supporting yourself.
That's probably true, though. I'm not keep an eye open, but I don't think he's going to bring that up when he gets to temporality. That isn't what interests him about temporality. When he gets to temporality, it's going to be a structure of a more abstract kind of structure, but it's not incompatible with what he thinks about temporality. Do you want to say something? Resoluteness gets you. Yeah, that's what it seems. No, wait, is that right, or is it the other way? Which gets you flexibility? No, the death gets you flexibility, right? That all your possibility, you have to be ready to give up any and every possibility is give upable. That's let's see the Fronomius. Goodness, now the Fronomius. Where's the too old for victory? Is that in the resolute or in the anticipatory? Because that's the flexibility one. I would have thought. I'm just trying to think out loud to myself. I would have liked it to be death. What's that? Both could get you both. Okay, well, I doubt it, but I'm not sure yet. Well, you think so too? Get to the wholeness thing, right? But what gets you flexibility? Steadiness. Steadfastness is on 369. Let's see what that is. The constancy of the self. What gets you that? Anticipatory resoluteness gets you the constancy. It says at the bottom of 369. So that's not going to help much. And maybe that fits with what Tyler said. Okay, so both gets you both. Anticipation gets you the whole, and you don't have the whole until you get to anticipation. And resoluteness hasn't got you there yet. And so all I'm learning from all of you, but I don't. The one thing I don't give up is that the book is in the wrong order. No, because because I want to say no, because if resoluteness is incomplete and doesn't get you wholeness and doesn't get you constancy, then you ought to start with the thing that is incomplete but has the teleology of getting to wholeness and getting to constancy and explain it, and then show that it still hasn't got you there. Then you can go from resoluteness to death to anticipation, instead of getting this squeamy thing where you start with death and it's interrupted by resoluteness, then you come back to anticipation. Why should we do it that way? Well, how is any of them motivated? Okay.
It's going to be resoluteness. The resoluteness part.
Well, why would resoluteness get you the whole, or did I mishear you?
The whole.
Yes.
What if that flexibility is being a whole?
But conscience could be there with the death part. But I'm only rooting for guilt and the guilt part to be the first of the moves, and I don't see why you have to motivate it. I mean, all you have to do is say, now we haven't understood yet, because you never really get, the motivation is so flaky anyway, or so unclear what the wholeness is and why we need it and how we got it. Why can't you just say, now we're going to describe what authentic Dasein is like, and look at that, there's guilt. Well, because we're going to look at the temporal structure of it, but if you want to further, that's the real reason. You want a sort of fake reason. I mean, because you need guilt and throwingness to do the past, and you need anticipation to do the primordial future. You're going to have to bring them in somehow. Let him say the last word, and then I run at 4:30. Yeah, you get the word.
I think it's kind of enunciated.
Right. It's a funny way to put it, but yes, I think that's right. You are able to get the view of the whole way your life is from beginning to end, namely vulnerable, and that's at least how it looks to me. Is that how it looks to you? I mean, I don't know. You look puzzled. Anyway, I promised I would stop at 4:30, so I've got to stop. But that's okay. We'll come back to this. And thanks. I mean, I've learned a huge amount, mostly to take back most of what I thought, but that's already progress.